So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Troy Powell. I'm the Neighborhood Impact Manager with the City of Greensboro in the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department. I'm here with Assistant Director Unica Smalls, also in Housing and Housing Neighborhood Development Department. We're so glad that you joined us this evening. This is the last public meeting for Phase 1 of the Community Land Trust, in which we are engaging the community into a conversation about whether or not a community land trust is appropriate for Greensboro. No decisions have been made. We first want to be able to provide education about what a community land trust is, what it looks like, whether you as the community see that it can be beneficial to Greensboro as we move through the first phases. We are also joined here with Jason Webb. Jason Webb is our technical advisor that is with Grounded Solutions Network. Grounded Solutions Network has a wealth of knowledge. They have touched almost every land trust, community land trust across the U.S., including the 6 that are established here in North Carolina. And we're grateful to have Jason with us tonight. This session will be recorded, and it is recording now. We will make sure it's available on the website. The website of Greensboro that we have more information is www.greensboro-nc.gov/CLT. We'll have all information going forward. We'll keep it published there. We'll keep it posted for you. You do have a chat window in your chat as Jason goes through his presentation. If you will place your question in the chat, if it can be immediately answered, myself or Unica Smalls may go ahead and answer that question. If not, when Jason finishes the presentation, we will go through those questions one by one, and we will be sure that all questions are answered. Also, for better presentation or for your view, in the upper right hand corner of your screen, you'll see, if you hover your mouse up there, you'll see the word view. If you click on that, you will see an option for side-by-side speaker. This will be your best presentation experience. So with that, I will turn this over to Jason Webb.
Cool. Thanks, Troy, and thanks everybody for taking the time and coming with us on this beginning of a journey. My presentation is roughly about an hour and a half. And then we'll set aside about 20-30 minutes to make sure that we can grab everybody's questions and sort of start to answer them. As what Troy said, please go ahead and use the chat feature as questions may come up as I am presenting. But a little bit about myself. So my name is Jason Webb. I currently serve as the Community and Technical Assistance Principal at Grounded Solutions Network. I come to this work with over 35 years of experience in community development, community organizing, affordable housing development with a specialty with community land trust. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. I had the privilege of leading one of the largest urban community land trusts here in the country called Dudley Neighbors Incorporated as for 15 years as their director. I started off incredibly young in my own community in Boston on Dudley Street, and I have the privilege of managing all of our technical assistant engagements at Grounded Solutions Network. And currently right now we're in about 22 other communities throughout the country. Grounded Solutions Network, we are a national membership-based organization that specializes in lasting affordability models. One of those models being the community land trust model. The idea for the community land trust is a long and a good story in terms of where the roots are. And that's where our presentation really starts, is the roots of the community land trust and where did this model actually come from. So with that, we're going to go back to when the model was first created here in the United States, and that was 50 plus years ago. So let's first travel back in Acts. Why were they looking at a community land trust as a model?
There were many African Americans who were sharecroppers and tenant farmers in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Tennessee. And when they attempted to register to vote, they were forced off of the land.
So there we have the great late John Lewis setting the stage as to what was happening 50 plus years ago when the founders of the community land trust model and what they were actually coming up against. Now, we have done our best to come up with a simple version of how we trace back the roots of the community land trust. Now, while this may seem overwhelming in terms of an image, one of the important things to note is that this model here that is 50 plus years old has had a lot of touch points with a number of other movements here in the United States and also abroad. Some of the movements have been the single tax movement, the US peace movement, even the Grand Dame movement over in India. And is this model here has definitely been influenced by the US civil rights movement. But let's also hear from one of the founders of this model in his own voice as to why he felt like that this model is what was needed.
I woke up this morning in my mind. You would stay on freedom. I woke up this morning in my mind.
I was canvassing on the plantation. I knocked on the door of a man and his wife. They promised me they'd come to the mass meeting. They comes to the church with their 5 children. They told me that they had been kicked off the plantation, had nowhere to go for the night. How many people whose doors I've knocked on got kicked out of their homes with their children, without a job? And I was partially the cause of it. So I lived in deep guilt and frustration. So that's how the spark of the need for land came to me. Seeing the land, just the land itself, the beauty of the land, the purity of the land, and the acknowledgement that all power comes from the land, and the land comes from God. All power comes from the land. Absolute power comes from God. And that's my ministry. It's still my ministry.
So there we hear from the late Charles Sherrod that talks about the importance of land, and that when we think about land, a lot of us think about it from a perspective of individualism. And Charles thought of it, and a number of folks thought of it in a very different way of how we can do this collectively. Charles Sherrod and a number of other individuals planned in 1968 as an American delegation that actually went over to Israel to take a look at different types of land tenureship models. And they were so impressed by the Musha model, which combined individual homesteads and cooperative farming on leased land. Charles Sherrod and this American delegation were so impressed by this model that they brought back a lot of those legal documents to start to draft a new blueprint of how a new model of land tenureship could happen, specifically in the South for those farmers that were being forced off of their land. One of the things that they acknowledged was that if we were going to create a new model of land tenureship, that they needed to bring together a pretty robust and broad spectrum of individuals to come up with this plan and to garner support for this new model. The first community land trust here in the United States was incorporated in 1969. New Communities Incorporated was the first CLT, and they started off with 16,000 acres of land that was collectively owned and was predominantly used for agricultural purposes. At the time, New Communities Incorporated was the single largest land ownership of African Americans. Now, in 1970, the model itself took an adaptation towards the urban context. So in 1970, the first urban community land trust was actually set up and incorporated right outside of downtown Cincinnati, Ohio. This community here was starting to feel some of the pressure of the redevelopment of the downtown area. And the community came together to try to figure out different ways that it can protect itself from this development. In the 1980s, the model saw a huge shift of municipalities starting to support the idea of collective land ownership and this idea of how we can create not just affordable housing, but permanent affordable housing. Now, this is not necessarily a surprise because in 1981, the federal government made a bold declaration that said that they were out of the affordable housing business, that they were going to stop funding affordable housing, that this was a local problem and should be funded just by local funds. The federal government went ahead and slashed HUD's budget, and that budget has never actually really recovered from that. But 3 important cities stepped up and was ready to actually go a different way of creating affordable housing. The first one is actually in Burlington, Vermont. And the mayor at the time for Burlington, Vermont was a man by the name of Bernie Sanders. And Bernie, was always thinking about how we can collectively own things together and work more closely together. So he instructed the city staff to go ahead and to actually grant $250,000 to start one of the first community land trusts outside of New Communities, Inc., which is called the Burlington Community Land Trust. The second city that sort of took a bold step was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, around this time, there was a wood manufacturing plant that was doing plywood that was leaving the city, and the land itself was going to be, brought back into city ownership. The community came together and said to the city, is there a way that you can donate this land to us and we will start to redevelop this area into a new community and we'll use a community land trust as our vehicle. And with this land that was 28 acres of land, the city went ahead and made that bold step and donated it to that community land trust. Where I'm from, which is Boston, Massachusetts, and the land trust that I operated for several years, Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, the city of Boston took a pretty bold and sometimes controversial step where our community was left vacant for many years. about half of the land in the community which I grew up in was vacant. About 30 acres of land that was basically left behind and was a huge blight to the community. The community went ahead and petitioned the city of Boston to actually transfer the power of eminent domain, to actually help start their community land trust to gain control of this land so that we can actually do redevelopment of our own community. So these three cities here in the 80s really started to step up and think about affordable housing in a different way. Now, also in the 80s, the model saw a huge heartbreak, and that was in 1985, New Communities Incorporated and 16,000 acres of their land was foreclosed upon. Now, New Communities Inc. was, what some folks would say ahead of its time. It had visionaries. It had a solid sort of foundation of spirit, of sort of collectiveness. And one of the things that New Communities Incorporated could not get away from was the entrenched racist policies that was in Georgia at that time. Now, New Communities Incorporated, because they were predominantly doing agricultural work on this land, they could not get relief from 5 years of constant drought. Now, while their white counterpart, farmers were easily able to get government-backed loans to be able to help them through these drought years, New Communities Inc. kept applying for these loans, and they kept getting denied these loans. And it got so frustrating that, Charles Sherrod petitioned and asked the governor of Georgia at that time why they kept getting denied. And the governor looked him directly in the eye and said, "You'll get that money over my dead body." So New Communities Incorporated unfortunately lost all of their land. But that's not where the story ends, because in the early 1990s, New Communities Incorporated signed on to a class action lawsuit against not just the state of Georgia, but also the United States Department of Agriculture, to really start to lift up and bring to light these racist policies that were happening. The government and the state quickly sort of settled with New Communities Incorporated. And with that settlement, the founders of New Communities Incorporated realized that their vision has not been achieved yet. So when you can get $12 million in damages, what do you do as civil rights activists that have not had your vision fulfilled yet? They went out and they actually bought more property. So they actually own another part of a former plantation right outside of Albany, Georgia. Now this piece of property here was actually pretty significant because one of the things that this property was known for was two important facts. One is that the plantation was owned by the richest man inside Georgia. And the second was that there were over 100 slaves that used to occupy this plantation. So the descendants of slaves wanted to send another message and out to the world that even though that yes, they lost their initial land that they worked so hard to get, that they are still going to achieve their vision of collective land ownership and of this idea of collective farming. The property is known as Resora. It is also a conference center where they go ahead and they rent out the property for groups to come to get recharged and to bring their mind at ease. As what Shirley says, in this quote, is the fact that they wanted to just have a place that is about relaxation and restorativeness. To only being in nature can provide that. Now, the founders of this model had a pretty well-defined definition as to what a community land trust is. And a community land trust is a democratically structured nonprofit with an open membership and a board of directors that's elected by that membership. Because the founders of this model believed that membership rights needed to have some weight to it. So they thought about how the membership could actually go ahead and actually approve a number of things within inside of the organization. So membership would be able to approve bylaw changes. This idea of a resale formula, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that again, the membership would have that ability to change that if they so fit. If there was disposition of assets, again, that's not just a board of directors conversation or a staff conversation, but the founders really thought that the membership also played a role in that. If any of the sale of the land was needed to be done, that again, the membership needed to weigh in. And God forbid if the organization did need it to dissolve, that again, that's not just a board conversation or a staff conversation, but it's also a community conversation. Now, one of the powerful things about this model is that it is grown and is spread far and wide here in the United States. Here, our last count is that there's over 300 community land trusts excuse me, 300 nationwide. And you can easily double that when you think about across the globe. We have seen amazing growth in this model in the 1990s and currently right now. And one of the things I love to say is you can do anything with real estate on a community land trust. It is a vehicle for allowing for decision-making to happen on a community level. Now, here actually in North Carolina, there is a rich history of community land trust going back to the 1980s. We start with Durham Community Land Trustees, which is one of the older community land trusts being established in the 80s. As we saw some of the first iterations of the community land trust, but it didn't just stop in Durham. Chapel Hill also has a community land trust. Charlotte has a community land trust. There's been one recently established in Asheville, in Boone, also in Wilmington in the Cape Fear area. Our newest one is actually in Concord that just got established last year. And we know that there is efforts in Raleigh to get one going. We also know that there are conversations in High Point, and we are unpacking the conversation here in Greensboro, whether that this model is the right fit for the city. So now now that we know where our roots come from, where this model comes from, we're going to go over just some of the basics of this model. And by far, the community land trust is a vehicle that acquires, owns, and stewards land permanently for the common good. Community land trusts are mostly known for affordable housing opportunities, but commercial spaces, community spaces, we know that our roots are in farming and agriculture. And we know that open land can also be put onto a community land trust. Anything you can do with real estate, you can use for this vehicle. Now, the community land trust has some core elements to it. And we actually take this from our founders. So our founders felt like membership and governance was a core element of the community land trust. This idea of holding the land and subsidy in trust of the community is incredibly important. And this idea of stewardship, how we can actually help these homeowners and the community be the best that they can be, is incredibly important. These three elements are what our founders have said are what make up the community land trust. And the great thing is that for each one of these core elements, that there are a level of customization that you can do to make the community land trust really fit your city and also your community. But generally, a community land trust is a nonprofit organization. It's going to have a defined service area, and that can be as small as a neighborhood to as large as an entire city. This idea of a corporate membership, which just means it's an open membership that can be defined within inside of that service area. So some community land trusts will say anybody that lives within inside of our service area can become a member of the community land trust. And the community land trust has a very distinct board of directors. This board of directors is what's called a tripartite board of directors. Now, this board wants to bring together the three equal and important groups that have interest in the success of the community land trust. One is the community members, the folks that are already living in the community in which the community land trust wants to serve. The next are what are leaseholders, could be homeowners, could be renters, anybody that is leasing the land from the community land trust, they should have a say on this board of directors. And the last third is the public stakeholders. That can be where public officials are on, banks are on, different sort of foundations can come and be a part of this board as well. But these are three equal groups that are all trying to work together for the same purpose of being a successful community land trust. Now, the community land trust uses a different type of ownership structure. And the ownership structure that they use is what's called a dual ownership structure, where the individual will own the improvements, basically the home, and the community land trust will retain ownership of the land. Now, a 99-year ground lease is what ties the improvements and the land together. Now, this ground lease does three critical things. First, it outlines the rights and responsibilities of the community land trust. Second, it outlines the rights and responsibilities of the homeowner. And third, it creates what's called a resale restriction on the home. Resale restrictions are what set community land trusts apart from other forms of affordable housing. And we'll go over what those numbers look like a little bit later to give you a better picture of how the community land trust does that. But it's through these resale restrictions that allow for these homes to stay permanently affordable, while at the same time allowing for some wealth creation, but at the same time allowing for another family that may want to buy that home that was in a very similar economic situation to be able to afford it. I'm going to show right now a little bit of a community land trust in action, and then we'll keep going.
How do you increase the economic development of a neighborhood and make sure that poor people can take advantage of those improvements? Because so often what you see is improvement strategies, improving low-income neighborhoods, and also moving poor people out as part of the improvement.
When the neighborhood was really destroyed, the community came together and said, we want to be able to rebuild, revitalize this neighborhood in a way where those of us who are here now aren't going to be priced out. And so we set up a land trust to protect the affordability of the homes. And at the time that we did it, it was a pretty new idea.
The majority of the Dudley neighborhood is in Roxbury, with a part of it in North Dorchester. So the Dudley neighborhood is in the heart of Boston. The land trust primarily focuses on a 60-acre area in our neighborhood that we call the Dudley Triangle. In that triangular area, we own about 32 acres of land. We've sponsored about 225 units of affordable housing.
That 30 acres of land that had been vacant when DS and I started, it is now filled with permanently affordable homes, with parks and playgrounds and a community greenhouse. We built the last homes in the community plan during a national economic crisis, including an unprecedented collapse in the housing markets.
We went to an open house on a Saturday, and from that open house, we, like 3 weeks later, had gotten ourselves very involved with everything.
We're like the only ones attempting to buy a house.
In Boston.
The waiting is the stress.
I think the whole process is stressful. I'm a social worker. That's stressful into itself. I think house buying is the most stressful thing ever, next to giving birth.
It's a blue house, halfway down Brookford Street. Tamar's room would be on the second floor. Ayani's room is on the second floor, and then Teresa's room is on the third floor with mommy and daddy on the other side of the hall.
It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I look forward to having a stake in the property and a stake in the community.
A community land trust is an arrangement that recognizes that the community has an interest and a family has an interest. So it splits ownership.
The individuals who buy the housing, they own the house but not the land. And the purpose of doing that is to keep the housing affordable and in the community.
These homes right here are 18 new units. It's cost us about 300 grand to build it. We're selling it for 185. Having the community really control the land will ultimately mean that the house that's on top of it will always be affordable.
A startling amount of families are on the verge of losing their homes here in Massachusetts. Last month, more than 2,800 foreclosure petitions were filed. This is the first step in the long foreclosure process.
In the middle of a major foreclosure crisis, our land trust has been a real pocket of protection.
We made sure that any mortgage lender would be a responsible lender, not a predatory lender. As a result, land trust homeowners almost completely avoided the types of predatory loans with hidden interest rates, teaser rates, exploding payments due, that people literally next door found themselves having to pay and face, and they couldn't do it. Homes on land trust land are weathering the financial turmoil and the foreclosure crisis enormously well.
But not all the homes in the neighborhood are on the land trust. Right next to our land trust homes, you have streets now that are being abandoned with empty homes, and that attracts crime and creates a real stress for families in our neighborhood. The foreclosure crisis has really threatened all the work we've done.
We've convened a foreclosure roundtable as a part of a strategy here in Dudley to actually bring a lot of the agencies together to talk about all of our different methods to prevent foreclosures.
I live right down the street and walk to work, so I look at all the properties and I can see when a property is starting to go down. All the clues are there are no signs, no boarded windows, but you can begin to see it.
People economically
are riding the wave and they're just waiting for the next shoe to drop.
I think if we can map it and look at the clusters and then use some of the street knowledge, let's walk, our partners have been able to acquire abandoned or already foreclosed homes, and they're putting them back in the market. But within the context of the national economic downturn, there continue to be huge challenges for us as we do our work.
You want me to initial this thing? I don't know why I just asked. It's in front of me. I feel like from our perspective, this is an emotional purchase journey, uprooting our family. Like, this is dramatic.
This is a compliance agreement, and basically this one is that in the event that the bank needs any documents signed, you're going to cooperate with them in re-signing.
I see that house every day.
Every day?
Every day. I told you, I said I stalked the house. Hopefully it hasn't seen me hiding in the bushes. But I've been there.
Buying into this land trust means you can't resell at market rate. That's not the intent of what these houses are for. It's for people who want to live in a community and want to be able to make it possible for someone else to be able to do what they did, start off with something affordable.
It does. Oh, wait, look. He's got something. Look at that. He's got keys. You want to be the first one to touch the keys?
No, you go ahead.
Are you sure?
I might pass out.
No, I think we should touch them.
Same time. I'm kind of thinking it's like a together thing.
All right, don't hog the key. All right.
Today's really a good day for you guys to all come back together and really to have a dialogue with the governing board that oversees the land trust. I've worked with all of you guys individually to continue to, be an open door for you guys. I know that sometimes I don't, answer my phone. I'm trying to work on that.
I'm president of the Land Trust, and hopefully we can have dialogue about some of the things that you need and some of the efforts that we can make on your behalf.
One night my alarm went off. The response time with the cops, it took them like 25-30 minutes just to show up. I said to my kids, if we weren't being killed, they would have killed us and gone.
That's another part of the problem that we need to solve collectively. And so the more people bring those kinds of circumstances to us, the more we can work on those together.
Some of the Brookford, Dacia Street, Rand Street families have gotten together and done a couple of meetings, meet and greet, and we looked into a neighborhood watch. We're very motivated and committed to keeping the streets safe for our kids to play in. So we've had 3 meetings. We're just motivated to start something.
I've been here for 17 years. I wanted stability, I wanted connection, I wanted a sense of belonging. When I bought the house, I bought into a community. And I could either sit back and complain, or try to make a difference. Buying this house turned me into an activist. This was a heavy drug area, and it's not like that anymore. If you want change, you have to work for that change.
It's really, really nice to have the opportunity to do whatever you want. So we have things hanging on ceilings, we have pictures on the wall, we picked our own paint color, and so to have that freedom was amazing.
Never send a man to buy pink.
Never. With this particular house, we own the structure, but we do not own the land. It's under a land trust. And so we still have a landlord. There's still conditions on owning this house.
So the original deal was, after everybody moved in, they were gonna fence in all the yards. And first they told us they couldn't do it last year because the ground would be frozen. And then they told us that the contractor wouldn't be able to do it until next year. So we all started complaining, and finally he got another contractor, but they still haven't put the gates in, and they haven't said when they're gonna put the gates in. They actually said they have no money to do the gates right now.
If they're not gonna do it, don't say they're gonna do it. And if they're gonna do it, then do it in a reasonable time frame. You're a lot less angry and bitter if you know what's going on.
Sometimes we overpromise. There's a lot that residents want to do, have asked us to help them with, and so communicating the progress, communicating some of the setbacks has been a real challenge for us.
We created a neighborhood watch group and then partnered with the Boston police in this area.
The police are good.
They won't respond if they don't have calls, so call. And so we started calling, so they started responding. So it was good.
Now our neighborhood watching turned into more of a, we do potlucks and we cook on the grill and everybody brings
Neighborhood fellowship.
Yeah, neighborhood fellowship.
We established a community that we feel comfortable with. And hopefully in the years, it will continue to expand itself.
So that is one community land trust in action. The idea of permanent affordability is a formula in which the community land trusts use. So the formula is that we will lower the price of the home initially compared to the market. At the time of resale, again, we will keep the price lower than the market to allow that next family to also afford the home. And we can do this again and again and again. The idea of affordable housing, and this goes with all types of affordable housing, is that we are all trying to figure out how we can fill what is called the affordability gap. And that is the difference between what a family can afford to buy a home and what the market price of that home is. So in this example that we're going to walk through, the market price of a home is $200,000. What a family can afford to buy is only $155,000. So there's a $45,000 affordability gap. Now, the unfortunate piece that we've all seen in our communities is that these affordability gaps never decline, that they only increase over time. And it is predominantly because wages do not grow as fast as the housing market. So these past few years, we've seen some of the highest affordability gaps that we've ever seen. We are always trying to find and seek a fair balance between what the individual wants and what the community wants. This idea of wealth creation with this idea of affordability, the risk that come with home ownership, with the rewards that come with home ownership. Programs and community land trusts seek to find this fair balance, and they do find it. The idea of strategies is the ability of looking at different strategies. For the community land trust, we look at what's called a subsidy retention strategy, and that is what creates the permanent affordability. There are other strategies like subsidy forgiveness and subsidy recapture that doesn't deal with the affordability, but is more asset building strategies that can be deployed. So now we're going to actually walk through what is a hypothetical sort of scenario on how the traditional affordable housing model works. So here we have the same market price of the home at $200,000. We have the same family that can only afford $155,000, and we still have a subsidy need of $45,000. So we're going to structure this like a down payment assistance grant program. The speculation on this program is the family needs to stay in the home for 10 years. If they stay in the home for 10 years, they don't need to repay back the $45,000 that we're giving them to help buy this home. So the family goes ahead and buys the $200,000 home. 10 years go by and they're ready to sell that property now. The market value in that community has gone up to $240,000. And because we've said to them that they just need to stay in the home for 10 years, that's how much that they can sell their home for. So they're going to walk away with the seller portion of $85,000. $40,000 in market appreciation, plus the $45,000 subsidy that we gave them in the beginning. They will get an above market rate of return on their initial investment. But let's look at what this looks like for the next family that needs to actually buy an affordable house. We know that the sale price of the house is $240,000, but the new buyers can only afford $185,000. While wages have gone up, they haven't kept pace where the market has increased. So that means that we need to come up with $55,000 new dollars to help this second family. Now, again, this is a strategy that is used. It has its purposes, but the community land trust model works in a different way. We still have the same market price of the home, the same family that can only afford $155,000, and the same subsidy need. But instead of giving the $45,000 to these individuals to buy a $200,000 home, we would take this $45,000 and give it to the community land trust to reduce the price of the home down to what that family can afford. So the market will still go ahead and appreciate to the $240,000 10 years later. But because they're a part of a community land trust, they're going to be able to sell the property for only $185,000. Now, we created what's called a resale formula and a restriction on the price of the home where the formula escalates by 2% per year. This gives the family the ability of some wealth creation and at the same time allows for the property to stay affordable. So the seller is going to be able to walk away with $30,000, and $55,000 is what stays in the property for that next family. Now, I created this formula of 2% by looking at the historical increases in wages for the past 10 years. Looking at wage growth in a 10-year span will give me an idea of how much wage growth happens year after year. That is how we base a lot of our resale formulas, is by looking backwards and seeing if there's trends to be able to project forward. But let's look at what this looks like for the next family. So the next family comes along, and the sale price of the home is exactly what this new family can go ahead and be able to purchase. We don't have to bring any new money to the deal, because that $55,000 stayed in the property and was able to help that second family by reducing the cost of the home down to what that family can afford. Now, I know that it's not as neat and clean in real life, but I hope that this gives you a good idea of how the community land trust is a little bit different than the traditional model of affordable housing. But one of the things that we are going to walk through is actually a real life example from another community land trust that has been around since the 1990s. So back in 1998, this community land trust was working with this family, and their income was about $13,000 a year in 1998. They were able to bring together about $1,155 as a cash down payment. They were renting at the time of $700 per month. And one of the things that you would do is you would look at what would be the affordable rent amount that would be able to support that $13,000 earnings. And we calculated that it was actually $475 a month is what their affordable rent should have been. Now, this community land trust was able to go ahead and build a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. They were able to go ahead and put a price of the home at $95,375. They were able to also leverage the dollars in cash as this family's down payment. And their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, they were able to make sure that it calculated to the affordable price of every month $450. So that's what this family was able to do. They were able to buy a home for the affordable monthly cost of $450. Now, 20 plus years go by and this family is ready to sell. So they're ready to sell. Now, their resale formula allows them to go ahead and resell for $147,000. They were able to go ahead and pay off their mortgage of $90,000. They were able to take care of the closing cost of $5,800. They were also able to, because there were some repairs that were needed to the property, they were also able to take care of the repairs, and the cash at closing that they walked away with was $40,200 that they walked away with settling all of the other debts on the property. Now let's take a look at this idea of wealth creation. Now, with inside this scenario, let's remember that this family here 20 years ago only brought to the table $1,100 as their cash down payment. And what they're walking away with now is $40,000 from the sale. But let's also remember that they had a monthly mortgage payment of $450. Now, we would say that they have made a huge amount of what's called rent savings over these 20 plus years. And when we calculated it, it estimated to about $51,100 in rent savings. And this is the difference between that $450 mortgage payment that they were paying versus the $700 in rent that they were paying prior to becoming a homeowner. So they have a beautiful home that they loved, and that they were able to walk away from the closing table with $40,000, $200 in cash at the time of resale. So realistically, they were able to get a $91,300 financial benefit from being a part of the community land trust. But again, as the same in our hypothetical example, let's look at in real life, what does this do for the next family? So this is the next family that went ahead and bought that home from that individual. Now their earnings were about $37,000. They were actually renting a property for close to $2,100 a month. Now, because they came up to be a part of the community land trust, the idea was that they were able to buy this home for $155,000. So their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance payment is $1,040. That means every month that they are not renting, but because they bought this home, they are saving over $1,000 a month, annually about $12,000 a year. So we talk about affordability and wealth creation from making sure that if we are taking folks out of the rental place, that they are put into home ownership with a lower monthly payment. Now, the idea of the community land trust also as a part of one of those core elements is about stewardship. And community land trusts are doing stewardship in three important ways all at the same time. They are working with the homeowner, and they are working with the homeowner not just to attain home ownership, but to also retain it over time. So community land trust will work with homeowners and through the ground lease, be able to protect them if they get into a rough spot. And unfortunately, they get into default under their mortgage. The community land trust can be there to help work with that homeowner to get them back on their feet and get back into good standing. The idea of the subsidy, as what was in these examples, that $45,000, the community land trust wants to preserve that affordability for future home buyers. And then when we think about stewardship, we have to think about the quality of the construction or the rehab of the homes in which the community land trust develop. We want to also, as the community land trust, promote sound maintenance over time with these homeowners. So sometimes community land trust will do different programs like a tool rental, program, where the community land trust will buy a whole bunch of yard tools and allow for their homeowners to go ahead and use them as needed. Or, as what I learned as being a brand new homeowner, sometimes you just don't have the right tool for the job and you may have to go out and buy it. But some community land trusts will say, no, we'll just lend it to you for free. But here are some other examples of how community land trusts have looked at stewardship. So here are three community land trusts that have looked at stewardship in some different ways. The first one is out of Seattle, Washington. And in Seattle, Washington, one of the things that they realized was that a number of families needed some additional support even before the homes became available to purchase. So they teamed up and they actually created a homebuyer club between the African Town Community Land Trust and the Homestead Community Land Trust, where they use supportive mechanisms and also some counseling to help folks go through this journey. As what Dacia said, buying a home can be extremely stressful. And sometimes it's important to have that support network that you can lean on. The Durham Community Land Trustees did stewardship from a perspective of the entire community, because they found out and they understood that the Durham County had 3 programs that were available to help reduce property taxes for folks that qualify. So they wanted to make sure that they sent this message out, not just to the homeowners on their community land trust, but to the general community also. Same thing in Pima County, where in the height of the COVID crisis, we saw a number of rental evictions happening, and the county teamed up with the Pima County Community Land Trust to make sure that folks understood that there was some resources at hand to help folks that were actually going through that. Stewardship can also go above and beyond. Here is a photo, unfortunately, of the remains of a community land trust homeowner's home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, this homeowner luckily was not home at the time, but she was actually at the hospital giving birth to her second child. A tornado ripped through her community, and this was sort of what was left behind of her home. The Community Land Trust, again, came to the forefront and worked with that homeowner, went to the hospital, explained to her that she didn't have a home anymore, but that the Community Land Trust was there to help her. The Community Land Trust had a property that they were selling at the time. They took that property off of the market and said to the homeowner, please live here for the time being. The Community Land Trust also asked the homeowner, would the Community Land Trust be able to be her representative as she has to go through all of the different agencies to get her home rebuilt, including through FEMA and the insurance company and the contractors and all of the other agencies that it took to get her home rebuilt. The great thing is that her home did get rebuilt, and it was predominantly through the Community Land Trust support. Now, governments in general play an important role in helping community land trust. Over the years, and as what we saw in the 80s, governments can bring resources to the table and also additional tools that can actually make community land trusts more sustainable over time. Here are 2 studies that have been published. One is by the Lincoln Land Institute for Land Policy out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, that talked about this city and community land trust partnership that can be formed. The other one is actually a collaboration between Grounded Solutions Network and the National League of Cities that created a guide for local governments if they wanted to help community land trust. Here are 5 important ways that they can do it. Provide startup funding. Ensure that there's a project pipeline of properties that the city may own that they can donate to the Community Land Trust. Hire consultants and other experts to continue to help form the Community Land Trust or help it support its sustainability over time. Doing the funding for affordable housing. That subsidy has to come from somewhere. And then taxing the CLT properties accordingly. The great thing is that there have been a number of city and CLT partnerships throughout the years, and including a number of them here in your own state of North Carolina. But let's go ahead and let's actually get a little bit local and hear from the Durham Community Land Trustees and their experience with the Community Land Trust.
Community Land Trusts are nonprofit membership organizations that take a new approach to ownership of land and housing. The 3 land trust stories in this video show some of the ways that local residents in growing numbers of communities across the United States are organizing to gain control over their land and resources and using the land trust model to create a stock of permanently affordable housing.
I was a single mother with 3 children at that time. I just gotten divorced. And I was working 2 jobs and trying to go to school and take care of my kids. And the more money I make, the more they ask for. And I remember there were times when I had maybe $15 left over to carry me on to 2 weeks. And I was getting very frustrated with the system of, trying to have a decent place to live. For me, the future was quite bleak. I just couldn't help but think, what I'm going to do this all my life. I can't get ahead this way. I almost felt like, well, maybe I should just quit, go on public assistance, and let them take care of me. Buying a house was never a dream of mine. I never thought that I could ever afford it. But I was sitting in my office one day, and I was going through the newspaper, and I saw an ad in the paper saying that if you want to own a home, here's an opportunity, no money down. I'm like, right, yeah, right. But I felt like, let me take a chance. I'm going to call. I met the executive director, and I said, well, do you have any vacant houses right now? And she said, yes. And she brought me over to Exum Street, and the house was just in repair. But I loved it. I'm a country girl. I love the old houses. I love the front porch. I went inside and it had the high ceilings, and I was like, this is it. This is my house.
The organization Linda called was the Durham Community Land Trustees, based in the West End neighborhood in Durham, North Carolina, next to the upscale neighborhood surrounding Duke University. The Durham Land Trust, like many others around the country, was started to improve and preserve the deteriorating local housing stock that had been abandoned by absentee property owners.
If you drive through Durham, you'll see there's a lot of houses that are boarded up. And that's because absentee landlords can come in. They know that there are a lot of low to moderate income people that need housing. A lot of substandard houses. They used to be called liquor houses, if you want to put it. Actually, 4 walls, windows, no heat. And people used to come and stay for a little while. The landlords didn't do anything. They never complained. A lot of people don't know that they have a voice to say, I don't deserve to live this way. They can't afford anything better, so that landlords don't have any pressure behind them to fix it up.
During the era of about 1950, the elderly people started dying out. And then that's when the landlords started moving into this area. Little by little, they took the houses over. And little by little, the younger generation sold the house and moved out this area, moved north. And little by little, the landlord took the land for a little or nothing. What we want now is to make this a more family-type community like we have always had. The Land Trust got in here and they did a beautiful job. Somehow or other, they gave the people what they wanted. That was housing.
This is a typical Durham Community Land Trustee rehab. We've gutted it with volunteer efforts. We will take this house, and where there's tongue and groove hole, it'll be all new sheetrock, all new walls, new windows, new doors, fully insulate to the floors, actually blown into the walls. Everything will be new in terms of new fixtures, new kitchen, new doors. This will be back to regular height, and then the addition will be put back on the end. And after the resident selection process, we'll have a new resident move in for a home ownership opportunity. The Land Trust started work on this street and was invited in by the community with a community march that was organized to board up this house because there were drugs and other illegal activities occurring here that they wanted to restrict, which has been real typical on this street with any of the vacant houses. Since then, we have done 5 rehabs, and over time, it's really become a much more stable street. And this is typical on all the streets that we target. If we're able to get 3, 4, 5 houses rehabbed, tends to stabilize with the home ownership.
Since the land trust has come into this community, things have changed tremendously. We're talking about quality, affordable homes. This is a quality house. Central air, central heat, thermal windows, energy efficient. The land trust prides themselves on having quality, not substandards. And the surrounding community has taken note to that.
Land trusts reduce the cost of acquiring and renovating their properties and the initial purchase price to homeowners with government subsidies and private donations, including contributions of volunteer labor.
I asked them at that time was how much money do I need? About $1,500 to get in the house, to own it. And they were like, yes. They sat down with me and explained to me that I would be purchasing my home, but they would have to retain the ownership of the land. At that particular time, I wanted the house, and when I asked them why did they maintain ownership of the land, they explained to me that the reason they do that is to guarantee lifelong affordability. That should I ever decide to leave this home and move to the traditional market, that they would give this house back to someone who was in the same circumstances I was. I don't own the land, but I have full rights to the land. You know, and the one point I keep telling people, this is not a step, you're not fixed here forever. Should I move on in life, I will leave this house to my children. It will always be affordable to them.
You would have the same rights to that land as any other homeowner would. The only difference is that the land trust reserves the first right. If you decided to sell that house, the land trust would have the first right to purchase that house back from you, or we would help you find another low or moderate income person to purchase that house. And the idea behind that is to keep that housing stock permanently affordable. So that way investors or absentee landlords couldn't come in, buy that property and inflate the cost of rent so that low and moderate income people, you know, would not be able to afford it. If you want to sell your house, there's a resale formula. This formula would give you back what you had invested in the house, plus an inflation factor. But you would not be able to go out and sell that house on the open market at an inflated value.
I know that I didn't buy this house to make a profit. I made it to get ahead. I always wanted to give that another person the same opportunity that I did. This is not the traditional market. You have to understand that principle before you buy a land trust house. All right, man, you want to set the table for me? Yes, ma'am. You or your children must live in the property at least 6 months out of the year. I can't decide, well, I want to move to California for 6 months, so I want to sublease it to somebody. That's also part of the ground lease. You cannot do that. Land trust has built-in safety measures, too. It's meant to protect those who really need it, not those who are trying to get over on the system.
It's very different from just owning land and a piece of property that's all yours. This is ours, but it's also the community's. And so, I mean, we're not in this by ourselves, and we never will be. And if we keep the house and pass it on to our descendants, they won't be in it by themselves either. They will sort of inherit our connection with the neighborhood and with the other land trust houses.
Most of the people that I've talked to over the years have always had the impression that the land trust was a white-owned organization coming in and buying up all the poor folks' property and getting rich. That was a misconception I had to fight for the 4 years I was as a chair president. It took a lot of hard work, and it took a lot of getting the community people involved. If you truly think that's the fact, the only way you're going to really find out the facts about the organization is to get involved.
I am particularly proud of the effort that's taking place today. It's Make a Difference Day. We were concerned about having this house painted because when it was initially developed, there was not a lot of money for the land trust to do things with. And we were concerned about the condition of Miss Yarborough's house. So we decided, why don't we put those two efforts together if it was okay? And people agreed. So we have volunteers from the Volunteer Center here. We have people from the neighborhoods of Southwest Central Durham. And they agreed that they would come together and paint the house.
About 3 or 4 years that we know it needed something done to it. Land Trust got involved, so we got involved. Yeah. Exum Street got involved. When Land Trust got involved, we got involved too. The neighbors. That's wonderful neighbors.
And this is the final stages of it.
It's been prepped to paint. And it's coming out real fine. Probably be through with it about 4 o'clock today.
Teach young boys how to paint. Hi, everybody. When I sell the land trust, I don't just talk about the fact that it's done housing. It's more than a housing corporation. It's a resource. For any problems that the community people are having, they bring it to the land trust. Be it whether there's the streets unpaved, there's no lights, there's safety issues they're concerned about, they bring it to the land trust. And you don't necessarily have to be a land trust owner or a tenant or leasee, as we call them. You can be anybody in the community because the land trust is a community organization. It's there for the entire community. You have vagrants to go in, drug dealers. We deal with all those issues. We take it to the city, we take it to the city council, we take it to the city police, bringing in all the big minds and all the big wigs in Durham to say these are issues we need to deal with people.
And I think the more we do outreach to the community and really, like I said, try to stay with people, then they're willing to come because they really feel like you have a genuine interest in them. I feel that we've had more success this year. We had our annual meeting, and we had great participation from the leaseholders, and there were some renters there. The Land Trust board is made up of a third residents, a third people in business, and then a third people in the community at large. The membership is made up of anyone who's willing to support our cause, and we have quite an extensive membership and people that support the work that we do.
I finally found somebody that cared enough to say, you deserve this. Just because you're not making a lot of money doesn't mean you don't deserve the same opportunity that other people who can afford to go out into the traditional market. And it touched my heart so that I felt like, here are a group of people that don't know me, that don't know nothing about me, and I want to give something back too. So they asked me to join the board. I always remember the first meeting I went through. They were dealing with business of, down dealing with the city council, and they were using all these abbreviations, CBGA, money, and QID money, and I'm sitting in this meeting saying, how am I supposed to be a part of this meeting as a community person who knows nothing about housing? They walked me through the process, and maybe after about the third year, I was bad. I was ready, willing, able to speak before anybody. I had totally bought into the organization because I knew what it had done for me personally, and I knew what it was trying to do for other people in the community. Talking to city officials, going down to city council. I mean, my experience with the land trust afforded me an opportunity I never would have been able to receive, meeting a lot of important people, but finding out that they were just like me, people. They're no better, no worse, and developing a lot of lifetime friendship with people that I may not have ever had an opportunity to meet.
Housing is not something that should be traded and sold as stocks or gold or pork bellies, but it should be treated differently. So it's a very conscious statement of public policy. We have attempted to decommodify the housing stock. So rather than government doing all the thinking, people who own their own homes, many of them for the first time, are true stakeholders and have some control over their destiny.
So there is some of the origins of the Durham Community Land Trustees. And, I always love to start by sort of wrapping up and closing. And this is from my own community in Boston, that, when you use this model, some amazing things can actually come from it. And, in the foreground of this video shot, you have side-by-side duplex units. And then in the back, you actually have triplexes and fourplexes that are a part of a limited equity cooperative, where all those buildings, was once just all vacant land. So with that, I'm actually gonna hand it back to Troy.
Yes, so we'd like to thank Jason for being here tonight and sharing all this great information with us about a community land trust and what that could look like here in Greensboro. I want to thank all of you for your attendance and taking your time to engage us in this process. In the interest of time, I would like to recognize Councilwoman Hightower for any comments that she may like to add. And also, if you have any questions that you would like Jason to answer or anything that you would need clarification for, if you'll go ahead and type your question into the chat, we will, I'll recognize you, and Jason will work through that question for you. Okay. All right.
Can we not just speak? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
All right. I didn't want to leave your meeting with no one talking here at the end. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't want to talk over Councilwoman Hightower there either. But my name's Ryan Motes. I'm with D.R. Horton. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and listen to you guys and listen to your opportunities here. I mean, this question of affordable and attainable housing is absolutely an issue out there, and I'm happy to hear this solution. It is very interesting, and I would love to talk with the city further about this to see how we can partner together to figure this out, because you know, lots and lands aren't doing anything but going up out there, and the land cost absolutely has to be considered in the cost of the housing, along with all of the permitting processes and everything like that that is required in order to create a development, which I know the city of Greensboro is diligently working on at this time to try to streamline that, to lower the cost and the time kill on that, in order to be able to pass those savings along. And, you know, I was really, as I was listening to you guys in the beginning, one of my big questions, I was sitting here and I was thinking to myself, I was like, yes, but what about the wealth gap? How do these people, you know, if they're buying it affordable, but they have to sell it affordable, you know, how are they able to grow? And there's a solution in there. And I saw you guys present it, and I was happy to see that. You know, I listened to your conversations with John Lewis. You know, if you've ever listened to Senator Cory Booker talk about his experiences with affordable housing, it's very compelling, and that is definitely something that we are seeing out there, and it's something that well, I will say D.R. Horton, and also me personally, I'm doing everything I can to try to make homes as affordable as you can out there, because first time home buyers, people with lower incomes, things like this, you know, it's so hard to be able to get into a house. And I hear you on rental, but my bigger thing is I'm a big believer in ownership. You know, especially in the traditional market, rental homes and in the traditional markets, in my opinion, are not a way to get ahead. And I really, but you know, homes that are so expensive to buy, well, no one can even get into them. And that's the thing. It's you know, well, hey, you're a first time home buyer. This home is $300,000. I mean, that's tough. That is not that's not even close. That's not even double what I bought my first house for. I mean, well, it's over double. I'm sorry. It's over double what I bought my first house for. And it's just, and it was in great neighborhood, great school district, everything like that. And nowadays it's just so hard to find. And so I really appreciate what the city of Greensboro is doing here, looking to find solutions. And like I'm saying, my name's Ryan Moats. I'm with D.R. Horton, and if we can get together and talk a little bit and see how we can partner on this, we would certainly be interested in that, because that's what we do. We build homes for people. We want to give people the dream of home ownership. So anything we can do to help, let us know.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Moats. There is a question. We'll go with the first question in the chat from Melanie Woodard. How close is Greensboro to beginning a community land trust project in the coming months?
So it's a great question, and I think I bring it back to what Troy opened us up with, and that is that we are in the education phase of this. We want to make sure that everybody knows what the motto is, understands what it does, and to also get feedback, whether folks think that this is a good idea, is it not a good idea? Because this is something different than what is traditionally done by government. Government will sometimes bake something and then try to sell it to the community. This model right here has to, come from the community. So the CLT itself can be created relatively quickly. But again, we need to get a sense that the community is ready to support this. So I would say that, definitely stay tuned, because we're going to be getting more feedback from folks. And then if folks give us positive feedback, then we're going to be able to move forward pretty quickly.
All right, the next question is, besides government funding, how is a community land trust funding generally sourced?
It's a great question. So community land trust developments are predominantly sort of, funded out of some of the same streams as any affordable housing. Excuse me. So whether that's philanthropic dollars, whether that is government dollars that sort of go into, that type of production. We know that there are also some national funders out there that won't do just production, but will also help support with some of the operation for a community land trust. We also know that some community land trusts do have a mix in their portfolio that also includes rental that could be able to bring some income into the community land trust to help offset some of the operating cost of it being running. So those are the places that we would see. But again, our second part of this process after the education piece is done, and if we get positive feedback, is to do a feasibility analysis of how will a community land trust also be sustainable? What are going to be those mechanisms outside of government funding that we can sort of identify to be brought to bear to help make sure that whatever we get created can last forever? Because again, what the community land trust is asking for is a 99-year ground lease with any of these homeowners. So we want to make sure that we can create an entity that can stick around for at least 99 years.
All right, I don't see any more. More questions in the chats. Does anyone have anything else, or if you want to come off, unmute, you're welcome to. I think Bruce Rich.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I have a question. I have a question about the role of the city. In the Dudley Street and in the Durham Land Trust that were featured in the presentation, it seemed like the land trust process kind of bubbled up from the street, from the neighborhood, and was sort of initiated and organized by the neighbors. There wasn't much talk about actually the role of the city of Boston or the city of Durham. There might have, there probably was some role, but in this case, I noticed that the city of Greensboro, neighborhood development is kind of backing the initiation, pushing forward this process, rather than uh, uh, sort of organic neighborhood organization, or the neighbors getting together. So what is the role of the city, and does it take both to bring off a land trust process?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that a number of cities throughout the country are looking for those additional tools in the toolbox for how can affordable housing be developed and actually sustained in communities. While you are right, the Dudley Street and the Durham were more of a grassroots sort of, created community land trust. What the city has done is the city has said, hey, why don't we bring this information to the community and see if the community wants this or not? So instead of the community trying to figure out and create the resources necessary to bring in somebody like a Grounded Solutions to help facilitate this conversation, the city has taken the step to say, wait a minute, we have resources. Let's go out to the community and let's entertain this with them. And let's figure out if there can be a different type of partnership than what maybe historically government has done. So to me, I actually don't see this as a phenomenon. I'm actually seeing a lot of governments actually contacting Grounded Solutions and saying, can you have these conversations in our community and figure out if a community land trust could work here? We can help maybe fund it to get it started. But what the city has immediately, and I've said this to the city, this community land trust can't be controlled by the city. It's got to be controlled by the community. That's the way this model works. So while they may be able to start it, while they may even sit on the board, but they're not going to be the majority on the board and control this or organization. It's just not the way that this model works. But more or less, I'm seeing a lot more governments approach us and say, hey, can you come in to our community and at least have the education piece, and then we'll figure out with the community where it goes from there.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think it's great that Greensboro is that the city of Greensboro is coming out to the communities and talking about this process. I've been getting phone calls from people who attended some of the neighborhood meetings that you've done over the last couple of weeks, and I can tell you there's a lot of community support.
Right? Yeah, I mean that's what we're hearing as well, is that, in one community meeting, some residents was like, why are we so late to this party? We got all these other cities in the state, and we're usually the first out of the gate to do innovative things in Greensboro. So that's what we're hearing as well, is some positive feedback. But we're also going to go back to folks after they have sort of absorbed this information to check in with folks to make sure that folks are still supportive of it before we take this next step. So one of the other questions.
Excuse me,
please,
Jason, I just want to introduce, just ask Bruce a follow-up question. And that is, would he be willing to share those contact name and numbers? Because we're in the process of developing a distribution list around the Community Land Trust Initiative. So if you could follow up with me or Troy or Michelle, we'd be happy to include those individuals on our distribution list.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. There is one question in the chat. It is, do community land trust ever buy existing construction or only raw land to build on?
It's a great question. I would say that yes, in terms of how the community land trust is able to acquire property is a number of different ways. And again, it could be vacant land, or it could be existing structures. And some of that is that some CLTs that have been around for a while have been able to build support and foundations that are willing to give them lines of credit to be able to go out and actually acquire property that way. Other property is just donated into the community land trust. Some community land trusts work with estate planners of families that may want to go ahead and, you know, will their property into the community land trust as a part of their family heritage of being in that community. So there's a number of different ways that the community land trust can go ahead and acquire property to be able to be used for affordable housing. It's not just vacant land.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I have placed a website link in the chat. If you want to write it down, it is www.greensboro-nc.gov/CLT for Community Land Trust. We will be placing the recording of this Zoom meeting on there later tomorrow. And any information that we do provide for further meetings, further information as this process develops, we will also place it on that web page. I also want to recognize, I introduced initially Unica Smalls, one of our assistant directors in the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department. Her contact information is in the chat. She is the point person. Her and myself handle the Community Land Trust, but she is the primary point person for this project. So do feel free, if you have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to reach out to her directly, or myself, or our director, Michelle Kennedy. I see another question just came into the chat. Does your experience tell you something about location and distribution of land for new construction or rehab? I'll just go and read the whole entry. Is there a preferred density of dwelling units, and what about multiplexes?
So my experience tells me that you can definitely go ahead and create a community land trust that is what's called scattered site, where they don't have to be contiguous. They can be sort of, you know, dotted throughout a community or even a city. Durham Community Land Trustees started in a very sort of one community. Now they're in 6 communities with inside the city of Durham. Dudley Street started with that 32 acres of land, and now we are actually in different areas of the city of Boston. So the Community Land Trust, in terms of the housing construction, is definitely something that can be designed to be scattered site. Now, when you're thinking about new construction or rehabs, you have to work with what you got. So some community land trusts will be started like mine, where we had plenty of vacant land. So that's what we started with, was the new construction. And then later on, as we filled most of that vacant land with new assets, we started to look at some of the empty buildings and started to go ahead and do some rehabs on. In terms of density of dwelling units, I would say that for a number of community land trusts, they look at what is a part of the zoning code. And, you know, and again, multiplexes are okay. They all have a place. It's just about where in the community does it make sense to put that many families on one piece of land. That, you know, so those are things that we would, again, if the Community Land Trust was to move forward in Greensboro, that we would start to think about, and we would start to figure out, okay, what land do we have access to? How big is it? How many units could possibly fit on there? And take the conversation from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Is there any more questions? I'll give it just a moment.
Yep. No, I'll just say again, great conversation tonight. I appreciate everything. We would definitely be able to help you guys with a new community. Rehabbing communities would not necessarily be our forte. But if there was a piece of raw land that the city was interested in implementing one of these projects on, I've sent Troy my information. I've sent Unica my information. And so if you guys want to get together and talk about this further, you know, we're the nation's largest home builder. We're the largest home builder in the triad, and we know how to do this thing. And so we can sit down with you guys and really work this math problem out and figure out how to make it work. And so you guys let me know if you need anything else from me.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'll ask Unica Smalls, would you have any closing remarks?
Just to recognize that I'm sure many of you have had a long work day, as Troy, myself, and Jason have. We want to acknowledge your extra effort to be here tonight and to listen in on what is the start again of a conversation to add another resource to our affordable housing initiatives. Thank you again. Feel free to reach out. We know a lot of information that's been shared, give you an opportunity to process. We're here to help and we're available.
All right, with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.